The year is 1628. A warship that was counted among the mightiest in her times would set sail for the first time. However, her maiden voyage came to a drastic end shortly afterwards. The ship created history in a way her creators might have never anticipated. Hello everyone, this is the story of the Swedish warship Vasa and the most incredible salvage and restoration projects in the history of the world. Story of Vasa is not especially spectacular except for her sinking and subsequent events that unfolded over 3 centuries. Vasa would have been just another warship if it wasn't for her fate. Due to a design flaw, Vasa sank in shallow waters just about 120 meters off of Swedish coast. She sank after having sailed only about 1300 meters in her entire lifetime. The cause of this tragic event was attributed to the poor design proportions that resulted in the ship not being wide enough. A strong gust of wind pushed Vasa to heel to the port side, and as a result, water gushed in through the lower gun ports. In the minutes that followed, Vasa swiftly sank in front of a huge crowd. However, what fascinated me most was the story of how she was salvaged and restored, and how the Vasa Museum is preserving such a magnificent treasure of history. The Vasa Museum gives us all an opportunity to go back in time and make it as real as it could get. Vasa sank in the year 1628, and some attempts were made to bring her up in the following decades. Despite the shallow depth of the seabed at 30 meters, those attempts did not succeed. The cannons in the ship were finally retrieved and sold around the year 1663. And after that, Vasa would slowly fade into memory for a couple of centuries to come. In the year 1920, brothers named Simon and Leonard Olshansky had applied for permit to salvage sunken ships near the Stockholm harbor. Their plan was to blow up the ships in order to retrieve the waterlogged black oak wood from these ships. Luckily for Vasa and us, they were denied the permit, and Vasa would continue a few more decades rusting in the cold Swedish waters. In the year 1956, a fuel engineer named Anders Franzen collected sufficient evidence to convince the Swedish Navy to send a diving team to go look for Vasa. Needless to say, there was a renewed interest in Vasa, and efforts commenced to salvage her. After tedious efforts spanning a couple of years, tunnels were dug and cables were passed under the belly of Vasa. The cables were connected to the pontoons floating over her. Finally, after 331 years on the seabed, Vasa moved once again. The lifting was an 18-stage operation by filling the pontoons up with water. This was in August 1959, and by September the same year, Vasa would be resting at a depth of 17 meters. A good year and a half passed before she would finally be lifted out of water. On 24th April 1961, after 333 years of laying underwater, Vasa finally surfaced in the Swedish waters. The ship from the 17th century slowly sailed into the modern world. Vasa was brought to the yard and was set up for exhibition almost a year later in February 1962. Experts worked on her restoration while the general public could still visit the exhibition. The interest Vasa generated was quite huge, and nearly 500,000 people bought tickets to see her just in the year 1962 itself. The restoration saga is one of commitment and perseverance, as the task in front of these conservators were nothing but challenging. The problem with waterlogged wood is that it cracks when it is dried, as the moisture evaporates. The restoration team had no room for error if they wanted to prevent the ship from getting destroyed. They resorted to a meticulous task of applying polyethylene glycol, or PEG, to replace the water from the wood. Now, the small artifacts could be placed in the PEG bath, but it was a different story for the Vasa hull as a whole. They would have to spray PEG on Vasa for a span of 17 long years using sophisticated pumping systems and nozzles. The drying process itself wasn't complete even after 17 years, and it went on for a few more decades. The humidity in the yard was brought down gradually over the next 10 years. Vasa eventually found her permanent home at Vasa Museum in Stockholm. Now, Imagine the passion, the commitment, the dedication, and all the emotions that go behind preserving such a beautiful piece of history. And remember, this preservation is an ongoing process that requires a religious monitoring of the ship's health. For instance, in the year 2000, the peculiar weather conditions caused drastic variations in humidity inside the Vasa Museum. This variation was caused by a higher number of visitors who were drenched in rain. The humidity resulted in a reaction between moisture and the sulfur content in the wood. The reaction produced acids that could eat the ship away. This prompted the conservators to upgrade the climate control systems in the museum by the year 2004. For me, Vasa's history and the story of salvaging and preserving her is a gentle reminder that we are all standing on the shoulders of the giants who went before us. For me, it was simply a fascinating experience to walk around the ship. Besides the ship itself, Vasa Museum has a great collection of salvaged artifacts, including parts of her sail in such remarkable conditions. I had missed it during the visit, but museum also screens a short film on Vasa which is highly recommended. The locality of the museum is also quite beautiful, and taking a stroll along the waters in the evening will be a memorable experience. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.